Light Pollution News, July 2025. Know but don't know your fireflies. This episode, we take a deep dive into fireflies, and that's a good thing because we have the president of the Pennsylvania Firefly Festival, Mr. Jeff Calta, here to talk about everything related to our flying friends. Also here is Dark Sky International's Tom Reinert. We talk about the importance of data collection, how 3 townships in Ohio turned off the lights for insects, and we asked, do plants care if pollination happens during the daytime versus nighttime? Listen up next for the answer. Welcome to Light Pollution News, friends. I'm your host, Bill McKinney. We do this every other week. I run out the door and gather up all the news just for you, our curious listener. If this is the first time listening to the show, welcome. We have a very good one for you today. If you haven't already hit that subscribe button, do it now. You'll never miss an episode. Also, as a reminder, you can find everything we talk about today via the show page on our website, lightpollutionnews.com. And if you really like what we're doing here, why not support the show? You can do that by helping us out any number of ways. For instance, it costs nothing to share the show. It costs nothing to get spread word of the show. It helps us by getting the word out. So why not? Hey, send a share out with anyone who you think might be interested in this topic or maybe might want to learn more about it. Or if you're looking for an upgraded experience, we offer paid supporters access to all of our news that we gather each month, sorted, of course. And that starts at the ultra low rate of $3 a month. It goes to help offset our server, web hosting, domain, production, and social media related costs. Some of you may ask, what are social media related costs? Well, to run a social media program like we do, it takes a lot of time and effort. So every little bit helps, and we're here always grateful for your support. So just click the link in the show notes. This month, we had over 150 related news items that our supporters will receive in a special supporter-only mailer. Okay, lastly, be sure to follow us on whatever social media you use. You can find us out there on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, LinkedIn, you name it, we're there. Also, feel free to join our mailing list. Subscribe via the link in the show notes. For you at home, this is a interesting recording. So we had major storms roll in over the weekend, and they decimated the trees in my neighborhood. So therefore, I'm recording actually offsite. If there's any weirdness to the show, you know why. I don't have the full setup here, not full studio, only running off a laptop screen. So let's jump to it. First up with us tonight is Mr. Jeffrey Calta. Jeffrey is the president of the Pennsylvania Firefly Festival, which takes place annually around the time of this recording. We'll be getting into the ecology and some tourism-related stuff in these episodes this month. So, Jeffrey, the PAFF is right up the alley of the show. Before we jump into talking about the PA Firefly Festival, why don't you tell us a little bit about who you are and what brought you to the world of fireflies?
Okay, well, thank you, Bill. When I was young boy, I was interested in nature and science. I am a self-professed science nerd. I embrace it. I love it. But my firefly story really started a number of years ago when I bought the current property and house I'm living at, and discovered that it is a wonderful firefly habitat. It's actually a multiple habitats within sight of my deck where I can, look at the surrounding area, and just discovered that it was just, again, a firefly haven. Over the years, I've been able to identify 15 different species of firefly just within a 1-minute walk of my house. And it just intrigued me because if you've ever seen it, I'm sure many of you have seen, certainly it was my introduction, is one evening when I first moved here, my wife said, Jeff, you got to see this outside. I said, what is it? She said, just come out and see it. And when I walked outside, my eyes got adjusted to the light. It was just what appeared to be hundreds, if not more, fireflies just flashing in the fields around me. And I'd never seen that before. The next day I was pumped. I said, I'm going to see if I can learn everything I can about fireflies and the ones where I could see. It turned out that it was not that easy 35 years ago. There's a lot of information on the internet now and books where you can learn about fireflies. But 35 years ago, you had to go to obscure journals, Penn State University or major universities to find out any information about it. But it didn't deter me. It actually made me more determined to find out about these wonderful insects. So that's how I got started. For years, I would do talks, firefly talks and walks in Butler County near Pittsburgh. In 2015, I met Ken and Peggy Butler, who started the Pennsylvania Firefly Festival. So a little bit about that. Synchronous fireflies were discovered in Tennessee, North Carolina, and they had been known since the 50s. The people had lived there. But, number one, at the time, science didn't believe that, this can't happen. Well, it did. And they found out that they were there. And of course, now they have the Smoky Mountains. They have the Firefly tours where, you can go, they bus you to areas where the synchronous firefly are and show you, you're able to see these fireflies in action. But nobody thought they were anywhere else in the United States. And it turned out that they were discovered near Kellettville, where Ken and Peggy lived. And they're from Akron, Ohio. They bought the house in Kellettville as a vacation retreat because Tionester Creek goes right past that. And Ken Butler is a big fly fisherman. And it's one of the, big
big fly fishing areas.
Fly fishing area. Yeah. Thank you. And they had no idea. They, it was like most people, fireflies, there's one kind and they flash and that's it. But it turned out that someone was backpacking in that area and saw what they thought were these fireflies flashing all at one time. And they just happened to know someone in the University of Georgia, an entomologist. And when they heard that, they basically got excited because they said, we believe you, but if you're telling the truth, then this kind of upends everything we knew or thought we knew about fireflies. So they sent what was called the FIRE team. Was it Firefly Investigation Research something or other?
Wow.
And it was for trained
That's a pretty hefty designation right there.
That came up to Kellettville, and Ken and Peggy were running a bed and breakfast at the time. So people came up and knocked on the door and said, we're looking for a place to, lodge for a few days. Can you put us up? And they said, sure. And they asked why. And they said, well, we're here to investigate fireflies. And Peggy said it well. She said, who knew, In fact, they had some weird people like trying to book rooms. So they thought it was just a crank.
Kind of like Ghostbusters, but for fireflies?
Sort of. And anyways, they came in and moved in. Ken and Peggy have a 3-car garage at their house, and they just took over the whole thing. They made it their laboratory and photographic area. And they found that there indeed were synchronous fireflies in the Kellettville area. And they actually did a survey of the whole Allegheny National Forest to see just how many different species there were. But it was confirmed that the Photinus carolinus, or the synchronous firefly, was there in a number of locations in the Allegheny National Forest.
So last night, I just got back from Cherry Springs Star Party, which is kind of, a little rainy, but we got some good skies. And I know the people up there tonight and tomorrow are going to have some fantastic skies. I saw a lot of these whitish blue fireflies. What kind of blink color did you synchronized fireflies give off?
Yellow.
Oh, okay.
But see, the color of fireflies, and it's one of those minutiae you get into if you're like me and you're weird and you're studying fireflies. Some are green, some are yellow, some are orange. There is one firefly in North Carolina that's called the blue ghost, but it has nothing to do with the color of the flash. So a lot depends on your eyes, the atmospheric conditions, but technically the synchronous firefly is a yellow flash.
Yellow one. Okay. In as an amateur astronomer, and other guest we have on today is Mr. Tom Reinert. Tom, when we think blue, it's usually white when it comes to stars,
Right.
And that's the way I was looking at these fireflies in much of the same way. It's just funny the way we think of optics, I guess, the way you use your paradigm.
And a lot of color perception of stars is pretty subjective.
Right. Correct.
Jeff, continue. I apologize.
Okay, so the distinguishing characteristic of the firefly that you should have seen last night was a series of 6 flashes, essentially a half a second apart. So over a 3-second time, you'll see something flash, 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 flash.
Yes.
Those are the synchronous fireflies.
Yes.
And they go through series. There's actually 2 synchronizations. I can get into that. But going back to the festival, Ken and Peggy tend to be entrepreneurial. And where they live in Forest County is a poor county. It's one of the poorest. There's only one red light in the entire county, to give you some idea how rural Forest County is. They made it their home, and they thought this would be, if they could show that, indeed the Pennsylvania state insect is the firefly, is that they could bring tourists into the area and celebrate the fact that, hey, we have this life form that nobody knew was here. And it's right there, and it's, wonderful. I mean, how many people have bad impressions of fireflies, right? All of our childhood's memories of fireflies are generally good and that sort of. So they thought that they would be able to attract people, and they started Pennsylvania Firefly Festival to celebrate. Initially, back in 2013, I think was the first one, it was truly a festival. They had musical acts on a stage. They had food vendors and craft vendors, and it was a free festival, just attend. And it started out with, I think, 300 the first year, but then the next year it went to 500, and the next year it went to 700. And when I joined up with them in 2017, they had over 1,000 people there. So we made some changes, and it's not really a festival anymore. I mean, COVID entered the scene and, prevented us from having too many people. But we also found out that 1,000 people were way too many people. They were tramping on the very habitat that, we were trying to protect.
Right.
Anyways, that's the story of the Pennsylvania Firefly Festival. It's not really a festival anymore, but we just kept the name.
So this event takes place usually around this time of year, right?
It's always the last weekend in June.
Should I be looking around the solstice every year for fireflies?
In Western Pennsylvania, and Pennsylvania in general, June is the major mating month. So that is when the males are flashing and the females are responding. So around the solstice, yes, that's about the time when the maximum number of fireflies are active in Western and Central PA.
Okay. Now, I saw something, and I've seen it past couple of years, is that the first week of May, like May 1st, 2nd, 3rd, right in there, here in southeastern PA, we typically have kind of a warm spell. Get up, you'll without fail have an 80-degree or 85-degree couple of days in there, and you see these. It's kind of like wooded fireflies in the woods. You'll see them. The whole woods will light up for a couple of nights. Do you know what they are?
I believe I do, because I have them again. Where I live, there's not a common name for it. Some fireflies have common names. Most do not. But if you want the scientific name, it's called Pyractomina borealis. Borealis meaning they're in the trees, so you will see them in the trees. But they come out early in May, and they have a flash pattern, one single yellow flash every 3 seconds. If you get an accumulation of them, you can have quite a show going on in the trees. But those come out early in May, and now they're gone. Their season is over.
Right. Yeah, no, they always put on a good show. And last night's show with these synchronized fireflies is pretty amazing. What you mentioned about people always have an affinity for fireflies. I came across fireflies when I went to make coffee. And when I was walking down to make coffee, I bumped into someone and they asked me, what are these things that are blinking? So, it may not be common knowledge anymore. Do you find that to be the case?
I have found that, at least in the eastern United States, and I'm not saying I know everybody, in the eastern United States, but what are called lightning bug fireflies. And again, lightning bugs and fireflies, same thing. I'm from the Ohio area originally. We call them lightning bugs. When I moved to Pennsylvania, they call them fireflies, but it's the same creature. I found that most everybody knows about fireflies, but nobody knows about them. You know what I'm saying? Oh yeah, I see things flashing. Those are fireflies. Yes. And if I get to talking to them in depth, I said, well, there's like 26 different kinds in Pennsylvania. And they look at me like, a deer in the headlights. Really? I had no idea. So I think everybody, I won't say everybody, but so many people have memories from being young, catching them in jars, putting them under their pillow, watching them at night. Some would release them into their room and watch them fly around. The only person I ever met that didn't know what a firefly was, and it was during a presentation here in Western PA, is I always asked the question when I started. I said, does everyone know, put their hand up if they know what a firefly is? And everyone did. And I said, does anyone not know what I'm talking about? And this lady in the back raised her hand. And I said, you've never seen a firefly? She said, no. I said, where are you from? She said, California. And the Western states are pretty much devoid of flashing fireflies. They have something called a glowworm, where the female glows in the grass and the males do not flash back, but they're looking for that glow. So there are people, but there's not that many. What led me to realize that fireflies, there's just this connection for most people. I used to belong to an organization called Toastmasters International, and it's one designed to improve your public speaking. So I gave my speech and didn't think much about it. At the end, though, people tend to, hang around and talk to people. And there was this group of people you could see in the corner of the room that were like waiting. And they seemed to be waiting for me. And I asked one lady, I said, are you looking for me? She said, oh, Jeff, I just wanted to tell you that was the best speech I ever heard. And she said, it made me remember when I was a kid and I was collecting fireflies, and it was such a wonderful time. And oh, thank you, ma'am. And she moved on, and another one moved in, and oh my, she started crying. Now these were tears of joy, but she talked about how her sisters and her used to watch fireflies when they were young, and her sisters moved away to California, but they come back every summer, late July, early August, to see fireflies. And I mean, what do you do with a crying woman? They were tears of joy, but it was amazing that she was crying over fireflies. And she laughed in the next one and said, oh, Jeff, this made me remember my childhood. It was just person after person after person was telling me the same story. And that's when it finally got through my thick head. Fireflies just work with people. They have these memories from when they were young, primarily. And you can't hate a firefly, right? People have maybe hate of the yellow jacket or mosquitoes, but you can't really hate a firefly. But I found out that there was this connection with people, and that's really what Pennsylvania Firefly Festival is doing now. We've gone from an entertainment type venue to an educational, and we're able to get the environmental issues out of habitat loss, light pollution, unwanted pesticide use, and how not only they are affecting all other life forms, but they are affecting fireflies. And most people would care less if the yellow jackets went away, but we're finding that, especially with younger people, that when they find out that fireflies are being threatened because of these three reasons, they sit up and take notice.
I think you just need one really good show, and people will want to have that in their backyard. Like last night, what I saw was, if I saw that every night, I'll be out back hanging out, watching that every night. It was pretty darn impressive. And
Bill, I've got that in June when the weather is nice and warm and humid like it is now. It's a show you wouldn't believe, and it's what hooked me. So yes, I wish I could get, I would love to have people come over to my house like tonight. It's going to be wonderful. I can tell. I wish I could have them all there to say, look at this phenomena that's going around, that's happening. A lot of people don't care, but I think if they saw a display that I saw or a synchronous firefly display, I think they would change their mind.
Well, this leads me into my next guest. And since we're talking light pollution, one of the things that I noticed last night was when car headlights came up. I don't know if the fireflies dispersed and went somewhere else, or if it took them about 2 or 3 minutes to come back to being active. But light pollution definitely is a major factor. And I saw that in real time with just headlights crossing a field. So I want to welcome the former president of Dark Sky International, Mr. Tom Reinert. You helped found Dark Sky Nova, which is Northern Virginia. You're an amateur astronomer. We met a few years back at the Cherry Springs Star Party. And for those who aren't aware, Tom is also a Harvard-trained attorney, now splitting time between the East Coast and the West Coast out in Arizona and Virginia. Welcome to Light Pollution News, Tom.
Thank you. It's good to be here and to hear about fireflies. I'm going to tell you a little bit about my background. It's not on the resume, how I got into this. And it was really a single evening that did it to me. In February 2013, I went with my wife and daughter to the Kitt Peak Observatory outside Tucson. And they have a great nightly observation program. My wife and daughter remember that it was 26 degrees. I remember that I saw the darkest sky I've ever seen. And I learned about light pollution because they actually had a good display there on light pollution. And it rekindled a childhood interest in astronomy. And I contacted then the International Dark Sky Association, started doing some policy stuff with them. And that led to more and more involvement, became a board member, became vice president for 2 years, president for 2 years, and I have 2 more years as a board member. And I do a lot of local work, Maine, Maryland, Virginia, Arizona. So I had an environmental background. I was not an environmental lawyer. I was actually a labor lawyer. But I did water pollution work on the Chesapeake Bay as just a side thing. When I came to Dark Sky, it was the same size as a riverkeeper organization I was working with in the Chesapeake Bay. $1 million budget, 8 employees, identical. And the riverkeeper organization had its job cleaning up one river in Maryland, and Dark Sky International has its mission cleaning up light pollution on the entire planet. And I said, wow, this is really where I want to get involved. And I've stayed involved and been heavily involved for about a decade now.
And since we're talking about I know you're big into protecting the environment, obviously, if you're doing this on the side. If you don't mind me asking, I'm someone who cares a lot about the environment. I know there are a number of listeners out there that care a lot about the environment. Here in the U.S., we live in a time when I think things are very much in flux and, there's a new reality. What would your advice be to people out there who are concerned about having rollbacks, I guess, to the protections that have always been longstanding for our environment?
Well, traditionally, environmentalism was a bipartisan interest, and it became polarized in the United States largely because of conflicts between environmental regulation and development. That has not really happened with light pollution. We've been fortunate on that. It's a bipartisan movement. We've worked very hard at Dark Sky International to stay bipartisan. So 2 of the most active states right now are Massachusetts and Utah. I mean, you couldn't find 2 politically different states. And we found that bipartisan efforts are continuing throughout the United States. I was meeting with a fellow named Rob Burgess from Dark Sky, Maine, a couple of weeks ago, and they're introducing legislation. He said, we have bipartisan support. So bipartisanism can exist in the light pollution world, but we have to keep it alive. The other thing is we have a federal government system, which means the states and locals of government authorities have a lot of power. So most things about light pollution are going on at the local and then the state level. We introduced new model state statute and local ordinances last year at Dark Sky, and people are taking them to their local authorities and they're making progress. So I don't think you're going to see federal light pollution legislation anytime soon. You may see some efforts. Many federal agencies, including the Department of Defense, are very concerned about light pollution. So there's a potential there even for some development in the federal side. So it's not a time to say, nothing can be done politically, we should sit back. To the contrary, there's lots of work to be done locally, and people should be pursuing it on a bipartisan basis.
Yeah, that's a really good point, to protect the bipartisanship. You don't want to turn it into a one side versus the other.
Yep. Yeah. It's very important.
Okay. Well, let's kick off this episode with an interesting event that occurs annually in New York City. And I mentioned this one because this is a good warm-up article. Obviously, New York is known for its towering structures. They have an experience called Manhattan Henge, which is exactly as it sounds. Instead of Stonehenge, you have towers, light going between the towers down the alleyways and the streets. And the sun aligns perfectly with some of the cross streets in New York City. And this year it was slated to be May 28th and 29th. The weather kind of muddied that up a little bit. They'll have a second try, or by the time you hear this, on July 11th and 12th. Have you guys ever seen anything like this? You guys ever witnessed anything quite as interesting as Manhattan Henge?
Yeah. When I came out of college, I lived in Manhattan for 2 years. And to explain to people, the east-west streets have good views west towards the Hudson River, and they're canyons because you have buildings on both sides. So pretty much every day you could see the colors of the sunset if you look down the block towards the west. It's really sort of northwest in Manhattan. On special days, you could see the sun going down, and that's really the Manhattan Gate. Actually, the most interesting thing I've seen from that perspective is that the cruise lines used to push off their boats from the 50s with an ebb tide, and the ocean liners would go down the Hudson River with the ebb tide sideways, and the tugboats would be trying to turn them, and it would take the entire length of Manhattan to turn them. So you'd look down the block and you'd see an ocean liner pointed towards you, moving sideways. And if someone can get a picture of that with the sun setting behind it, that would be a really good shot.
That's a gold shot right there. Yeah. Jeff, you see anything quite like that?
Bill, no. I would have to say no. And Tom, I'm from the Cleveland area originally, but suburban Cleveland. And after I graduated from college, I settled in Western PA. So I'm, the canyon, the big city life is nothing that I ever really wanted to do. In fact, I had a job opportunity in downtown Pittsburgh, one of my first, and I refused it. It was actually a good job, but I said, I don't want to work here. I want to work out in the sticks, as they say. Yeah. And live out in the sticks. And again, it's because of that, I think, nature background that I had when I was young. I wanted to keep that around me. So no, I mean, I understand it, and I understand the Stonehenge, but there seemed to be a purpose to the Stonehenge that I'd have to add the Manhattan Henge. It's like, it's chance. I mean, they just happened to make the city the way they did, and I'm glad it awes people, but I have to admit, it's not the most impressive thing to me.
All right. Casting shade on that. I got you, Jeff. All right. Well, since we've been talking a lot about the environment, this is going to be an ecological, environmental heavy show. There's a study out of the journal Environmental Pollution that provides a succinct visualization of sky glow changes that have occurred in 5 national parks in China. Those parks being Panda, Northeast Tiger, Leopard, Hainan Tropical Rainforest, Zhejiang and Wuyi Mountain National Parks. Over the course of nearly 30 years between 1992 and 2021, light pollution increased at times by double digits. Most of the increase itself came from either outside of the park or on the park boundaries or from settlements within the park. This study utilized space-time cube visualizations to provide a targeted cross-section of lighting encroachment. Tom, this is something you've probably seen a number of times in your tenure with Dark Sky. One of the constraints cited in the study was observational sensitivities, specifically advancements in light detection, how that evolved some of the data over time. How does this technology help frame the narrative around artificial light at night's impact on the nighttime environment?
Yeah, let me address the phenomenon those parks are experiencing and then talk more about the technology. First of all, that confirms something we're experiencing, and it's that we've certified many dark sky parks worldwide, over 200 worldwide. Those parks are tending to experience worsening light conditions, and not merely because their overall society is getting more light pollution. It's more light pollution around the parks. And part of that is development. Part of that is related to the towns itself. I mean, you look at something like the Grand Canyon, great park. It's got Las Vegas at the end of it, right? So you need constant vigilance. And I'll give you the best example. It's not a dark sky park, but the Vera Rubin Observatory is being built down in Chile. And we've learned this year, $1 billion project, this new state-of-the-art telescope. We learned this year there's a proposed project 5 kilometers away from it to put a solar farm there, which will bring light pollution. Even solar, there is technology working. You have to be vigilant to keep dark places dark because the challenges are constant. In terms of the technology, good satellite technology, good, greater sensitivity, fine. But the reality is we don't need a lot of new satellite technology to know we have a problem. The Globe at Night program, which just has people looking at example plates, very low tech, crunching that data is what showed us that light pollution is growing 10% a year. Our SQM measures, sky quality measures on the ground do very well. I have a board member, Kevin Walzak from Adler Planetarium, and he does STEM work with high school students, and they've developed sensitive light monitors, and they put them on weather balloons. They have plotted out northern Illinois, down to the meter on light pollution. So there's a great growth in satellite technology. Everyone wants to go there. But quite frankly, most of our technology, ground-based, can show us we have a problem. And we know we have a problem with light pollution. So I'm more interested in pursuing the solutions than necessarily getting the best data in the world, because the best data is just going to confirm what we already know.
So what do we do with the data, Tom?
You use it to publicize the fact that light pollution is increasing. We got great mileage on the study based on Globe at Night. That was publicized around the world. And the one thing Dark Sky International has done most effectively, in my view, is spread the word about light pollution and get more and more publicity about it. And I'll talk about that further later. But the awareness is increasing worldwide of this problem. And part of it is based upon technology and data. And part of it is just people are opening their eyes to the problem and being sensitized to it.
Since we're here, I want to mention this little piece that came through. We haven't really had too many good news about satellites. And in actuality, this is a satellite that was launched back in 2021, the SDG-SAT-1 satellite, which is a Chinese research satellite that has a narrow field of view, so much so that it's able to identify light sources down to 40 meters apart. So putting that in perspective, other previously available satellites were limited to a range of 1/4 of a kilometer. And then the camera actually sports beneficial tools for research, including 3 spectral bands, blue, green, red, near infrared, and an all-encompassing band. This enables researchers to discern the light sources. I will add that the satellite is not able to discern the directionality of the light, which I think Ken has been doing a lot of work on, right?
Yes. I mean, they are down to the meter. They can plot building-specific light pollution and, much more refined. And in an urban area, that becomes really important to know where your hotspots are.
Is there a master database out there for researchers to pull from that includes all of this combined data that researchers are like Ken's work? And
we are a repository of sort of a rudimentary version of that, of just light pollution, published studies. And you typically have to go back to the actual people who did the study to get the data. We are improving that, though. What we're doing is we're working with the University of Arizona to develop a database that will be focused on legal and statutory developments, but it's going to have a companion database that's going to be a scientific database based upon the database we already have. But when you're looking at raw data, you have to go back to the researchers generally.
Will there ever be a point where we can use this data to help zoning or for any kind of local community work, I guess? If a building comes in and they violate a code, you can actually utilize this as saying, hey, this light trespassing X amount here via the data resources we have beyond just going out there and doing it manually.
Yeah, I mean, I think Ken Walzak's study at Chicago at least was able to assess commercial and residential and public uses and found clearly the largest pollution was coming from the commercial buildings, right? So they could look at individual buildings. It's not at a compliance level yet, but it's been used as an assessment tool to determine which type of facilities are generating. Obviously you're going to find out car dealerships generate a lot of light pollution, right? So, surprise, surprise, yeah. Right? But, the difficulty of any of this, remember, if you're looking down at the source coming up, right? But a lot of the light is going sideways and bouncing off all sorts of other things. So your ability to refine the pollution source looking down, it does have some inherent limitations.
Yeah, we had a story on a while back that was talking about drones outfitted for assessing light impact. I thought that was pretty neat. And I thought that was kind of practical too. To me, it's more of a practical tool than trying to have them go out and figure out how to use a SQM meter, for instance.
Yeah, and I will say, be aware, every light pollution ordinance you're going to enact, you're going to have enforcement issues. And the issue in enforcement is the local governments are not going to have sufficient resources to enforce, or likely sufficient will to throw people in jail or give them big fines. They're going to be looking for negotiating resolutions. What's important about light pollution ordinances is they set a community standard that you can utilize to negotiate with people and try to get the authorities to annoy them a bit. But ultimately, people are not going to go to jail for light pollution.
I don't know if they need to go to jail for it, but I think that's a little extreme. But,
right. Would work.
It's true. Well, we were talking about fireflies in the beginning of the show. I'll use this as a transition over to some more ecology news, which is about mayflies. So as a reminder, you supporters, you people listening to the show, you can find more about all the links we have over at lightpollutionnews.com. But we also have an ecology page, a whole tab dedicated just to the ecology stuff we talk about. So let's jump into it. The first article is from First Energy out in Ohio, had shut off street lighting on several roads spanning 3 Ohio townships. The official reasoning was because apparently mayflies, when killed in mass, extract oily residue on roadways and make it kind of dangerous for drivers. Second to that, of course, was the actual concern for the mayflies, which serve as one of the basic food groups and indicators of a healthy ecosystem. The streets stayed dark for a couple of weeks until the hatching season had passed. I remember going out to Central PA not too long ago, 10 years ago back, and I would see mayflies huddled around gas station lights. And I don't think I've seen that in a while. Maybe I'm just not going out in Central PA at the right time. Is this still a thing? Do we see a lot of mayflies out in Central PA, like out in northwestern PA where you're at?
Bill, I'm not sure I can answer that properly. Mayflies, I'm aware of them, and I think fishermen seem to be more attuned to the mayfly situation than fireflies. So I can only speak of fireflies. And again, we have data, we have research. In fact, the Pennsylvania Firefly Festival, part of our budget every year is to provide money for intern research at the Kellettville site. And a few years ago, we have programs both with Tufts University in Boston and one with Bucknell University in Central PA. I know because I participated in this. I actually collected data for the researchers as they were doing it. And it showed clearly that bright lights adversely affect firefly populations. And the way they seem to do it is that fireflies communicate with light signals. Well, if you overwhelm their sensory organs as far as being able to find the female or the female, signaling to the male, you're not going to have the mating process. You're not going to have the eggs that yield, the next generation of fireflies. So light pollution, the most I can say to this is that we're finding, and we know from the firefly world, is that light pollution is not good for them. And many locations of fireflies are very specific. You can see that in my yard. There are certain species of fireflies only found in a certain area, a certain patch of woods near me. Other ones are only in the grass areas. And if you eliminate them, people say, well, why don't you just repopulate them? Find some eggs somewhere, firefly eggs, and, put them in those areas. They have actually tried that, and it doesn't work. So once you seem to eliminate a firefly for whatever reason, again, one of those 3 reasons, habitat loss, light pollution, or pesticides, they're gone. But it doesn't surprise me at all that, there's so many insects that are attracted to light, either for the right reason or the wrong reason. It was interesting when I read that article about, the mayflies being in such concentrations and yielding an oily residue that's causing a traffic problem. Who knew? Who knew that would ever be an issue? But with fireflies, they don't really cause a problem. They just disappear.
Yeah, I didn't know that was going to be an issue. I've seen these mayfly hordes in central PA. Every now and then we'll go out to mountain bike or to go to a lake out in central PA. And I always figured, you can tell definitely that light has an effect on insects. And we cover it a lot in the show because we have a lot of this. Ecology is the most documented area of light's impact on anything. And, visually seen it. So I'm not shocked that they would have a problem in these townships, but I am impressed that they actually decided, hey, you know what? There's a correlation between the street light we have here, the probably unshielded, poorly designed street light, and mayflies.
So the insects are clearly a big interest in the light pollution world and Dark Sky International. One of my board members is working on developing insect-friendly streetlights in Germany. Leanne Hennian, who's written about fireflies, was our keynote speaker last year, the book Night Magic. Mm-hmm. So the firefly community's there. We have a firefly park in South Korea, a Yongyang Firefly Eco Park, which is all dedicated towards getting kids interested in fireflies. They have T-shirts with fireflies on them. So people like fireflies. They're a good representative for insects that are being harmed. And, the pollinators are very important. And if they go because of habitat and light pollution, we are in very bad trouble. Subjectively, it seems to me that I get fewer insects on my windshield than I used to. And this really hit home to me last month because I drive back and forth to Tucson every year. And I was driving back from Arizona. I was in northern Arizona going between Flagstaff and Santa Fe, and I had an enormous number of insects on my windshield. And it really made me notice I'm not used to this. And it occurred to me, I'm in the Colorado Plateau. It's one of the darkest places in the United States. And even though it's a dry place, they still have a vibrant insect population. But a lot of portions of our country, I think it's not quite the same. I think we've lost a lot of insect habitat.
Oh, we'll have to wait for a study on that, right, Tom?
Yeah.
Have some data on that. Well, yeah. We talked about nighttime pollinators, and this is a really interesting one. Researchers over at Lund University cite less scientific attention to nighttime pollinators, of course, like bats, moths, nocturnal butterflies. I bet you at home didn't even know that there were such thing as nocturnal butterflies. I didn't know that there were such a thing as nocturnal butterflies. That's pretty cool. I would love to see one. From Ecology Letters, they performed a meta-analysis covering 135 studies and found that 90% of the 139 plant species looked at didn't care if the pollinator was working the day shift or the night shift. The plants just wanted some pollination. That means in the eyes of the plants, pollination shouldn't be limited to your own biased diurnal understanding of the world. Right, Tom?
Right. The plants don't care. As long as they can reproduce. Now, butterflies at night, the line between butterflies and moths is pretty subtle, and you can see a lot of them, and it's hard to distinguish them. So whatever it's doing, if it's flying around and pollinating and doing it at night, it needs to be protected.
Yeah.
And one thing I have to add, many people think that fireflies are pollinators. You find it on the internet. I think people write an article for a magazine and they quote someone else and they don't necessarily look at the facts. But I can tell you for a fact, fireflies would be an accidental pollinator. But what the
fireflies are interested in sex is quite
that is all they're in the adult form, Bill and Tom. That is what they are. That's what they're for. That's all they do. Of course, that's a number of insect species are that way, right? The adult form is the mating. But what they don't know, and what we lose if we lose fireflies, is that in the larval form, they're highly predaceous. And they are predaceous of things that we would like to keep under control, other grubs, snails, Japanese beetle grubs, things that, people don't necessarily like. The firefly larvae consume those. So if we would lose the adult firefly, that isn't going to impact a whole lot on pollination. However, in the larval form, and if those would go away, you would probably begin to see an imbalance in a lot of the soil creatures because they are very predaceous, and it's funny because people don't believe that, or they, well, fireflies, they don't sting, they don't bite, they're wonderful, they light up, they illuminate our memories. But in the larval form, they're very useful. So as the adult form, not necessarily, but as the larval form, which is part of their life, they are a very important part of the soil ecosystem.
Jeff, I have to ask this. In your research, when you were going back and forth to State College and whatnot, did you find that historically there was more common knowledge about the impacts that, say, these beetles, is it right to call them beetles, that there are positive impacts on the soil itself or the insect ecology around, say, a farm or something like that? Is this something that we may have lost over time?
I don't know if I can truly answer that question, Bill. I don't remember any specific articles related to that or information related to that.
That's fair. That's fair. I was just curious because I feel like, and this is very much me being biased here, talking just out of my ass. I feel like we get focused on our modern conceptions of things, but the natural world always seems to be forgotten about and then brought back via science. So we were talking about nocturnal butterflies right there. There's a new report out of University of Reading's Be Wild, which light pollution ranks as number 9 on the list of dangers for pollinators. And studies show that artificial light disrupts many stages of a moth's life and affects key behaviors and reduces pollination visits to flowers by 62%. That's quite impressive. Jeff, curious about your conversations with folks at night. When you talk about all this stuff, you're talking about the larva stage, how impactful they are, the blinking, when they become adults, what they're after. Do a lot of the people who are coming, are they already educated? They already kind of know what's going on? Or are a lot of them, is this the first time? Are they just going out and someone may have given them, hey, we got this great show for you. They bring the family and they have not too much knowledge about what's going on?
I found that it's both. We have people that come that, they're very knowledgeable. And a few of them we've offered positions like, would you like to help us with because you seem to know so much about this. So there's obviously an interest there. But then there's other people that say, wow, I didn't know that. And, you tell them about this and you tell them about that fireflies. I didn't know that. So I see both. And they're both wonderful because if someone's coming with knowledge already, that's good. They know about these things and they're trying to learn more. And then there's the people that had no idea, but they suspected, there was some reason they were attracted. Again, that firefly mystique just seems to attract people. And when they find out the details of fireflies and how they work and what they do, and it's really a rabbit hole when you start looking into firefly behavior and why they do what they do. Yes, you can simply say that they're attracting the mate to produce future generations, and that is true. And I won't go into it because it is a deep rabbit hole, but certain species do things that are really strange. You've probably heard there are fireflies that can mimic other firefly species, their flash signals, and attract them and consume them and eat them. Okay. How did they learn to mimic a specific flash that isn't theirs? It's just amazing. So I find both cases. We find very educated people and surprisingly children. Children are surprisingly knowledgeable, more than I would have ever thought, certainly more than I was when I was that age, about fireflies and why they're good and the larval form. They eat things that are, snails and slugs and things that are, not as charismatic, certainly, as fireflies.
I think children in general are just way more knowledgeable than
for sure.
than they were, for sure. For any of us at that age.
I think about how I was at 10 years old and 15 and 20, and I look at the corresponding kids there, they blow me away.
Yeah, it's pretty impressive. Well, I have this article on something that Tom, you're probably pretty familiar with. Anyone who's worked conservation knows about invasive plants. And invasive plants, to be clear, these are plants that are not necessarily native to an area, and they were brought in for whatever reason, accidental or on purpose, and they tend to dominate an area just because the predator isn't there, or for whatever reason, they like to very fast to move through the soil. They're good, sturdy, quick growing organisms. So a study in the Journal of Plant Ecology found that artificial light may impact the success of invasives. And the study used a control without light, a 15 lux lamp, say a hallway light, and a 30 lux lamp, which is kind of like a parking lot level light. And the color temperature lights were 6,500 Kelvin, which is a bit unrealistically cool, unless you live in a community that may already have 5,000 Kelvin lights. So I guess it's probably not that big of a step up. On biomass accumulation, invasives grew significantly under 30 lux, while natives witnessed a decrease, but at 15 lux, both experienced growth. And not surprising, both sets of plants performed better from a photosynthetic standpoint under the low level of lighting, though again, when looking at higher levels of light, invasives benefited and natives for some reason declined. Artificial light at night somehow appears to be correlated with invasive plant efficiency pertaining to the nitrogen use of that plant. This study kind of says that there's a clear advantage for invasive sets of plants. I'm not sure how much I would put into it at the moment because I'm not sure I understand why an invasive necessarily would benefit from light, unless it's somehow affecting maybe the soil chemistry or the insect predation of the native plant.
What we need to realize is evolution is going on all the time. And any impact human beings have on the environment has an evolutionary effect. There's actually a really good book called Darwin Comes to Town, which someone at a Star Party told me about. And what it really is about is the development of plants and animals, insects in urban environments. Urban environments have really changed bird population. They've changed insect populations because any factor that's hurting something in the environment is probably going to give an opportunity for a different species. So invasives are invasive because they're very adaptive species. And light is probably just one of many urban factors that they are more vibrant for overcoming and are pushing out some of the native species. And you say, well, sort of survival of the fittest. Yeah, but they may have their own limitations. And when the environment changes in another fashion, they're going to go away and we'll be left with no species. So light is one factor. I mean, there are birds out there who have adapted to catching insects at night who are attracted to lights. Surprise, surprise. They saw an opportunity in their environment and some of them adapted to it. So I think you need a bigger picture view of what's going on. And it's not just invasives that are benefiting, but any change in the environment in an urban world is going to have some winners and some losers.
Well put. Yeah. Well, maybe not for mammals just yet. There's a paper from...
When we become the loser that we really have a problem, right?
Well, there's a meta-analysis in Frontiers, right? They looked at the evidence for light pollution's effects on non-flying European mammals in over 48 journal articles. And the paper found that mammals suffer from circadian rhythm disruption, including phase shifts of their natural activity hours, changes in melatonin, reproductive hormones, breeding hibernation mismatches, sleep duration, and more. Maybe it's a little slower on our end, but I get what you're saying. There are birds that, we see this. If anyone casually notices birds, they're birds that are very well adapted to human ecosystems. You think of the house sparrow or the house finch, right? These birds they're thriving.
Right. Well, one of the things that's happened with suburban environments sort of replicate the edge of the forest, which is usually a small environment. We've made it very large. That's why we have a deer problem in the United States, because that's their environmental niche. We've expanded, so we have deer all over the place. We have deer tick. But a lot of the bird species have done very well because suburban environments are good for those edge of forest species. So we mess things up one way or the other, I guess.
Tom, I was driving today and I saw a deer. I thought someone put up one of those fake deers, and it was on the steps of their house on a main road. The steps out. There's just a deer standing there with both legs over the steps, just standing there looking around, and it moved. That's the only reason I realized I was alive. I thought it was just a plastic deer. And yeah, it's.
I had a half-acre lot in a suburban house in Northern Virginia and looked out one morning in my backyard, and there were 13 deer.
Ooh, wow. Did you have anything left when they left?
It's a herd.
I hope you didn't have a garden or anything out there.
It was gone.
Well, typically dark sky, Tom, you guys always say shine the lights down. But what about this? What if shining the LED lights on a window would reduce bird deaths? And in this case, shining light to essentially to brighten the UV coating of modern window glass to act as a deterrent for birds, so the birds actually see the windows. What a team at Utah State University did was they got ultraviolet LED lights and they shot them essentially at a window from flagpoles outside of this hotel. And according to NPR, it reduced the bird deaths from 11 a month to 0. So maybe the solution we should be doing, Tom, we should be shining lights on windows.
I'm willing to examine it because you're talking about ultraviolet light, which is a very small part of the spectrum, which we can't see. And different species see different things. One of the things we found out on circadian rhythms, you hear, stay away from 6,000 K. It's bad for us. It's bad for other mammals. Not quite true. A lot of other species are fine. And it's other frequencies that they have trouble with, other temperatures. So experimentally try it out, find out, assess whatever impacts it has on the environment. I mean, bird kills are really pretty awful. And our best allies in the environmental world are really the birders, because they get it on what light pollution does to birds. You're picking up dead bird carcasses at the bottom of a big building. That's going to get you pretty upset.
Yeah.
So I'm willing to try it out and do some more research on it.
Wouldn't that be neat if you could just shine UV lights and it would actually prevent some death? All right. Well, those researchers are in need of funding. It was not a permanent fix. They were just temporarily had an opportunity to take advantage of the situation. The hotel, I believe, that had large glass windows that suffered from constant bird collisions, which are still going on, but they didn't during the time of the research. Sad. It is what it is. Finally, before I have you guys plug yourselves, I want to go to this one last lighthearted, upbeat story, unless you're a songbird. In New Jersey, a hawk. Tom, you're talking about animals getting used to the edge of the forest environment. A Cooper's hawk has mastered traffic lights. Something that, many people in New Jersey have yet to figure out. So the Cooper's hawk pieced together how long the audible crosswalk sound would go on for and how long it would back up traffic at a light. So it was able to actually calculate the amount of cover it needed to go hunting, say mourning doves, house sparrows, starlings. And it's all would occur in the morning commutes. It required the hawk to have precise mapping of the neighborhood and then it skillfully navigated even 90-degree corners and houses to attack its prey.
Darwin comes to town, right? He learned his niche and he adapted to it, and he's got benefits. Yeah. I mean, these creatures, particularly birds, can be pretty smart. I mean, they're usually a focused intelligence, but they can figure out their environment very well.
Yeah, I saw that.
Nature is amazing, isn't it?
Yeah,
it is.
Amazing.
It is. Okay. A point that you made earlier about people coming with an interest, levels of interest. I think I've found. I live in Northern Virginia. It's an educated area, but there's a high level of naturalist interest. You see it, birders, bats, insects. We had a bat festival in Northern Virginia. People and their kids come, and they're sophisticated to be with, and if they're not sophisticated, they're there to learn more about the natural environment. There's a real hunger for that out there.
Tom, where can I find bats in Northern Virginia?
Well, we have bats. We had a bat festival here at Wolf Trap, which is a national park, and yours truly dressed up like Batman for the Bats Festival and spoke about crime, actually, because Batman teaches us that bad guys don't like the dark, and you can have a very vibrant urban environment, as we had in the United States in the 30s and 40s, with a lot less light. So.
Oh, that's crazy talk, Tom. We're going to get into that next show. Before we go, I want to have you guys plug yourselves. So, Tom, since you just spoke, how can folks learn more about anything you're working on? How can they reach out to you? How do you learn more about you, Tom?
The best place is to look at our website, www.darksky.org. But I would say this, Google dark sky in your state or region or city, because we have a lot of local chapters that have either Facebook pages or web pages where you can get a lot of information that'll be more relevant to what's going on in your community.
Great. And Jeff, how can folks learn more about the Pennsylvania Firefly Festival?
Well, they can go to our website, which is pafireflyevents.org. That one word, pafireflyevents.org. And that's our official website, and a lot of links from there that you can go to and learn about fireflies.
Now, I know you guys have a limited number of tickets, I guess, and I guess this year things changed a lot for you guys. I guess, do you guys do anything outside of the season to help educate, to get the community excited about fireflies?
Yes, we do. We don't necessarily solicit anything like that, but we get requests from garden clubs, Audubon societies, Sierra clubs, asking for, could you do a program on fireflies? Because, we've been learning about it, or, we have members interested in it. And we do that. We ask for a fee if they can afford it, but it all goes toward the organization. We're a nonprofit, so it goes to help our efforts, in firefly conservation and conservation in general. One thing I have to add with this is, and it's something that I experienced, like I said, 35 years ago was when I started looking for information, and there just wasn't any. And there literally has been an explosion that I'll describe it as an explosion on the internet, and books too. There are just so many books coming out that are dealing with fireflies. A lot of them are children's stories, but that's good because it gets the children interested. But websites, there are so many. If you just type in fireflies or firefly, you will get all sorts of information. Some of it you have to weed through a little bit because it's not accurate. Like I said, a lot of them seem to indicate that fireflies are pollinators. They are not really a pollinator. But there's a lot of good things now on the internet. So our website certainly would be a good place to start, because the links that we put on our website are ones that we know have accurate information. But there's so much on the internet now and books that 35 years ago wasn't there, and it's just there now, which leads me to be happy, because I think that the word is getting out. We had to go to a lottery system because we had to limit the number of people in the habitat areas, because at first they were just wandering around, and we found out they were probably stepping on females and stepping on larvae and stepping on eggs.
Yeah.
So we went to a lottery system because we had to. But this year, for 144 slots for the festival over 3 nights, we had over 2,000 applicants.
Wow.
In that lottery. So we know there's interest. We know that the synchronous firefly is in many places on the east, all up and down the Appalachian mountain chain, and other fireflies too. And I see it's not, I won't describe it as a groundswell, but I will describe it as every year more and more people seem to be interested in fireflies and learning about them. Because I think it goes back to when they were kids. Maybe their kids are experiencing now, so they're getting an introduction to fireflies. But it's such a charismatic insect, and it's so tied directly to environmental problems that I think we're getting the word out. And I'm very depressed about a lot of things going on in the world in terms of, when I was a kid, things are supposed to have been like wonderful by the year 2000. We'd have flying cars and everyone would be at peace. And obviously we're not there, but I do see a groundswell of environmental action, and some of it is tied to fireflies.
That's great. Well, there you go. There you go, folks. If you need to go for a firefly outing next year, you can, or at least maybe get your club or get some of your Boy Scout group or Girl Scout group or Scout group. I guess Scouts is what they're called now. Get them involved. And
we're trying to encourage people, and part of what we do is to encourage people, hey, we have those synchronous fireflies here, but we're finding out that they're everywhere. I discovered them in my yard, okay, just last year. I had no idea they were there, but I finally went to look at an area that I hadn't really looked at before at the right time and finding them. So they're everywhere. So we definitely are encouraging people, obviously not all 2,000 can come to the festival, but there's a lot of places that you can find where there are fireflies. If nothing else, just where there's some, and investigate them and look into them. And I find that on the increase. So I'm very happy about that.
There you have it. So thank you for joining us today, folks. As a reminder, if you heard anything that makes you want to shoot over a comment or an email, feel free to message me, bill@lightpollutionnews.com. If you're interested in getting in touch with Jeff or any of our guests, please reach out. And Jeff definitely will. Hopefully we can get some more people interested in the Firefly Festival and stuff that you guys are preserving out there. So definitely learn more about Light Pollution News, this show right here, via any of our social media outlets, lightpollutionnews.com. Light Pollution News is a listener support show, which means that we take no outside advertising and solely rely on you, listener, to help cover our expenses. If you like what we do, why not consider helping us by becoming a supporter? Today's show was recorded on June 22nd, 2025. I'm your host, Bill McGeady. Thanking you once more for joining me today. Remember to shine the light only where it's needed, unless it is a UV light that you can shine to prevent birds from flying in the windows. Have a good one, friends.
You too. Thank you.